Hello and welcome to episode 101 of the Learn and Work Smarter podcast. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Katie, and today we're talking about something that I know affects almost everybody listening, and that is digital clutter. A lot of us are pretty aware when our physical spaces get messy. We notice when our papers are piling up on our desks or when our backpacks become out of control, but I say that the digital clutter is a little bit sneakier. It builds up gradually in the background in our browser tabs, our downloads folder, our phone screens, our tablets and iPads, right? And we don't always realize how much it's costing us or how much it's affecting us until we are frantically searching for a file that we know we saved somewhere, or our computer freezes because we have 17 different documents open at once. So today we're talking about what digital clutter is so that we're all on the same page, why it matters more than you might think, and most importantly, how to figure out where your digital clutter is hiding, and then obviously what to do about it. Now, I do want to be clear from the start of this episode, this is absolutely not about having some perfect minimalist setup where everything is color-coded and pristine. That is not realistic, and honestly, it's just not even ever the goal. And if you ever got that message from me, I apologize. That's not my advice. The goal is to reduce the friction and mental load that digital clutter creates in our day-to-day work or school lives. Because when we find what we need quickly, when your devices are clear and simple, and when you're not constantly overwhelmed by visual noise every single time you open your laptop, that's when you can focus on the work that matters. And that is what this show is all about, doing the work that matters. As always, everything I mentioned today can be found in the show notes at learnandworksmarter.com/podcast/101. If you're watching this on YouTube, all of the links are in the description box. And if you haven't subscribed yet on YouTube, I would love for you to do that. You can also find me on Instagram at School Habits. That is where I'm most active. I share a lot of tips and strategies and behind the scenes and things like that to help you learn and work smarter. I'd love for you to join me over there. All right, let's get this show on the road. Hello, you are listening to the Learn and Work Smarter podcast, the podcast for students and professionals who want to learn and work smarter. I'm your host, executive function coach, and founder of schoolhabits.com, Katie Azevedo. As a reminder, everything I mention in today's episode will be linked in the show notes, including a link to the transcript, which you can also find at learnandworksmarter.com/podcast. So let's first talk about why this conversation even matters, why I'm even bothering to make a podcast episode about this. And I promise you we're only going to spend just a minute here, but I think that when some people hear digital clutter, they assume it's just about, being neat or having some type of type A personality. And as I said just a moment ago, that is not at all what this is about. Digital clutter creates real, measurable drag on our productivity and on our mental energy. Unlike physical clutter, which you might only deal with when you sit down at your desk or when you open your backpack or your work bag, digital clutter is in our face constantly. We're opening our laptop, we're checking our phone, we're switching between apps, searching for files all day long, whether you're a student or a professional. Every untitled Google Doc that you have to scan past to find the one that you're actually looking for adds, I'm going to use a word here that seems to make sense, sludge. It adds sludge into your workflow and focus. Sorry if that's a gross word, but I think it works. Every app on your phone or iPad that you haven't used in 6 months, but you just keep scrolling past, it's visual noise that interferes with what you're trying to do. Every browser tab sitting open in the background is consuming a teeny tiny bit of your computer's processing power and our brain's processing power too. And the cost of all of this compounds really quickly. The thing is, we don't always connect the dots between our digital mess and our stress levels. We just know that we feel overwhelmed or that simple tasks are taking longer than they used to or than we want them to, or that we can't find the things that we need them, but rarely are we self-aware enough to say, my sludginess is probably because of my digital clutter. You know what I mean? So that's why this matters. It's not about being perfect or having some Instagram-worthy digital desktop, although if that's your goal, by all means, go for that. But in reality, it's about knowing where your things are so you can find them, right? So you can just do what you need to do. So you can get from A to B without bumping into 1,000 different roadblocks along the way. Okay, now that we've established why handling digital clutter matters, In case there was any doubt, let's talk about where digital clutter tends to accumulate, and I'm going to walk you through 5 main zones. And as I do, I want you to think about which one is your biggest problem area right now. It might be all 5 of them, all right? Or you might have 4 under control and there's only one that, resonates. But hear me out. This is important because I don't want to overwhelm you. You don't have to tackle all of these at once. In fact, I strongly recommend that you don't do that. I say pick one zone, work on that, get it to a place where it feels manageable, where you're starting to feel good about it, and then you move on to the next zone. Because trying to overhaul your entire digital system in one weekend is just a recipe for burnout and probably just abandoning the task altogether. And everything I teach on the show is meant to be realistic and sustainable, okay? So we are talking baby steps, one zone at a time. But let's look at what the 5 zones are so you can kind of, pick which one to start with yourself. Zone 1 is your desktop. Obviously, this is if you work from a computer or a laptop. All right, if you're working from an iPad, hold up, because that is another one of the 5 zones. I'm going to cover that. We'll get there. But on your desktop, how many files do you have sitting on your desktop right now? If you had to guess, what would you say? 5, 20, 50, 100, more than that? I'm not here to tell you that your desktop needs to be completely empty. Some people love that clean, minimalist look. Hello, I'm one of them, and that's great. But that's, what I do doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you, right? If it feels unrealistic or unnecessary for you, that's fine. The question isn't, is my desktop perfectly neat and clear? The question is my desktop system, is my desktop setup working for me? Or is it creating friction? Is it interfering with what I'm trying to do? Now, here's what I mean by friction. If you can't find the file you need because you have to visually scan through dozens of other files first, that is friction. If your computer is running slowly because your desktop is overloaded, that is friction. If you're saving things to your desktop as some temporary holding place and then forgetting about them for weeks, that is friction. Your desktop landscape should be intentional. Maybe you keep a folder for current projects or a few files that you're actively working on this week, right? Because sometimes people like to keep things on their desktop as a storage location for things that they're currently working on. Totally fine. But if it has become a dumping ground for every screenshot, every download, every random document you created 3 months ago, that's where it becomes problematic clutter that weighs us down energetically and productively. I have worked with students who can't even see their desktop background images anymore because there's just too many files covering it. And look, no judgment, honestly, no judgment. I get it. Files accumulate, so do mine. But that level of clutter makes it really hard to stay organized and find what you need when you need it. In the case of my students, I'm never saying, hey, delete these files on your desktop because I personally want you to. It's more like, hey, did you know you have 19 duplicate copies of your resume PDF file on your desktop? Because you keep downloading it there and forgetting it's there because it's buried under 1,000 other files, right? Zone 2 is your downloads folder. So I want you to be honest with yourself. When is the last time that you looked in there? This is where files go to die, right? Every PDF with some weird file name you downloaded for a class or a meeting, every image you saved for a project, every installer file from 2 years ago that you don't even remember downloading, it all goes into your downloads folder. And if you don't address your downloads folder just once in a while, not every day unless you want to, but like once in a while, it will become this overwhelming mountain of files that you will just never want to deal with. But if you make it a habit to go through regularly, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, maybe once every 6 months, okay, but have some rhythmic predictability to it, then it becomes actually pretty manageable. Now, I'm not saying you need to sort through every single file in there right this second, but I am saying, or I am suggesting rather, that having some kind of maintenance routine for your downloads folder is going to save you a lot of headaches down the line. The downloads folder is not meant to be permanent storage. It is just temporary. Now, at some point, the files in there should either get moved to where they actually belong. Maybe it's a specific class folder in your Google Drive, or maybe it's another folder you've created in your desktop location that is for a very specific type of file, right? Or deleted because you don't actually need them. Let me tell you a personal story about the pain of the downloads folder. This actually happened recently. I got a new desktop computer for my home office, not the monitor, but the actual tower machine. I needed a better 4K, actually, for this podcast really, but I needed a better thing to process 4K files. Anyways, before we swapped out the old one for the new one, my husband was like, do you need anything on this old machine that you want to keep and transfer to the new one? And that meant that I had to take a hard look at my downloads folder. And honestly, I was overwhelmed by all of the stuff that had accumulated in there for the past, I don't know, I think I had my computer for like 6 years or something like that. And a lot of the things had names that weren't helpful, like image 5 or some PDF with some weird alphanumeric file name. So I had to go through each of these files and click on them and open them and decide if it was something that I needed to keep or delete. And I would say 99% of those files, like no joke, like 99% of them I deleted. I didn't need them. I had downloaded them to my downloads folder at some point, and then I never needed them again. I must have spent, I don't know, maybe an hour, maybe even more than an hour on that process. And I was so annoyed. Like, what a waste of my time. Right? So the minute you download something to your downloads folder, my suggestion is to just deal with it. Do what you need to do with it and move it to someplace more permanent or delete it. Because let me tell you, if you ever need to transfer computers, it is a pain in the butt. Okay, zone 3, browser tabs. All right, this one seems to trigger emotions in people. Like the browser tab thing, people have feelings about it. Like I've had interesting conversations, emotional conversations with people who really get defensive about the browser tab. So this all comes from a place of love, okay? But let me ask you, how many browser tabs do you have open right now? And I know that some of you, especially those with ADHD, might be thinking, Katie, like I like having a lot of tabs open. That's how my brain works. I need to see everything sort of all at once. And you know what? If that system genuinely works for you, if you can navigate it easily and it's not slowing down your computer or your thought process and it's not interfering with your focus and it's not stressing you out, that's a lot of ifs, right? Then keep doing what you're doing. Now, I'm not here to tell you that there's only one way to manage your tabs, but here's what I want you to ask yourself. Is it actually working for you? Or have you just gotten used to it? Are you just stuck in some story like this is the way I operate, when in reality, the way that you operate isn't actually working well for you, right? If you find yourself constantly searching for the tab you need, or if your browser's freezing up, or if you feel a little spike of stress every single time you open your laptop and you see all of those tabs and you don't know what they mean and they're attached to tasks that you had intended to do and that you didn't do it and now you feel shame about it, right? Okay, that's a sign that maybe it's not working as well as you think it is. Said with love, of course. I've worked with students who have had 25 or more tabs open at once. And when we, talk through it, they realize that most of those tabs are things that they opened days or maybe even weeks ago. Articles they told themselves they'd read, websites they visited once, never closed, Google Docs. This is usually what it is Google Docs. They finished working on, but, forgot to close. It is right now in the middle of college application season as I'm recording this episode. And recently I was working with a student in my office and she had written all of her supplemental essays for all of her schools in one Google Doc, as I advise. And we were going back and forth like pretty quickly between that Google Doc and the Common App, right? Copying each supplemental essay and placing it into the appropriate spot in the Common App. And she had so many tabs open that every single time we had to go back into that primary supplemental essay Google Doc to copy one of the essays, we literally couldn't find the tab at the top. She must have had 15 Google Docs open, like up at the top. And the more you have, the smaller the tab becomes. So you can't read what it is. So it's just like the little Google Doc favicon. You know what I mean? And we drove ourselves nuts being like, oh, is it this one? Wait, or is it this one? Is it this one? Right? So that is a perfect example of something seemingly harmless actually interfering with work. So here's a framework to think about this, all right? I want to give you a practical strategy here. If you haven't looked at a tab in the last week, ask yourself if you really need it open. And if it's something that you genuinely need to come back to later, like for real, there's better ways to save that information than just leaving the tab open forever, okay? You could bookmark it, you could add it to a reading list, you could save the link in a notes app. Chrome now lets you group tabs together as an option. You right click on it and it's create group and you can grab cluster a bunch of tabs together as one group. You can Google how to do that. That might be a good option for you. So instead of 15 tabs all related to one project, you just have that one project tab, right? The point is, browser tabs are meant to be temporary workspaces, not some kind of permanent storage. And when we treat them like storage, they become interference. All right, zone 4, your phone and your iPad or your tablet. Most tablets are iPads, but for both specifically your home screen and your apps. How many apps do you have that you haven't opened in months? How many screens do you have to swipe through to find what you're looking for? How many notifications are you getting throughout the day that don't actually serve you and are for things that you don't care about and that you don't use? Honestly, for many of us, our phone is probably the digital space that we interact with the most frequently throughout the day. So starting with this zone might make sense for a lot of us. If you're wondering, like, what zone do I start with? Maybe this one. So here's what we do a lot, right? We download apps for a specific purpose. Maybe a class project, maybe a one-time event, or because somebody recommended it, and then we just I don't know, never delete them. I've done this a million times. Most recently with a parking app that I needed to get into a parking garage. I downloaded it because I had to, and then it sat on my phone for a month. Same thing with an app that one of my kids' soccer team used for the game schedule and the practice schedule or whatever, but then he outgrew that league, or he aged out of it, and then the new league used a different soccer schedule app, and I just never deleted the old one for a year. These apps, they just sit there. They take up space. They create visual clutter every single time we unlock our phones. Same thing with notifications. The pings, the alerts, those are designed to grab your attention. That's their number one goal, which means that you're pulling your attention away from something else, which is likely work or school, and you're shifting it to your phone. Is that what you really want? Is that what we're here for, right? And I get it. Some of these notifications are genuinely useful. Maybe they're important, but most are just noise. You don't need to know the second someone likes your thing. You don't need to a push notification every time there's a sale at your favorite store. Or you don't need 27 news alerts a day. Your phone should serve you. It is just a tool. You should be using it, not it using you, to sound kind of basic and cliche, right? It should not be a constant source of distraction and overwhelm, but for many of us, it is. Okay, zone 5, email. This is the last zone, and I'm going to keep this one brief because I have other episodes that dive deep into email management. Episode 15 contains some foundational tips, and then episode 62 is all about managing inbox chaos and email paralysis, when your email is so, you never had a system, so it's just so overwhelming in there that you're paralyzed and don't even know what to do, how to even start. That would be episode 62. I will link those in the show notes if you want more on this topic. And then, of course, in School Habits University, I go really deep into email management, specifically for students. So that's where you're going to find the deep how-to strategies. Okay, but I do want to mention email here because it is a huge source of digital clutter for people. And if you're someone who keeps your email inbox open all the time, it's just always there as a browser tab open or, open on your screen, that's creating constant distraction. Every single time a new email comes in, your attention is getting pulled away from whatever you're working on and it's getting pulled into your email inbox. And that is a really stressful place. It can be full of requests that you misinterpret as being urgent, but aren't, right? Demands on our time. Those things trigger our emotions. And if you have 1,000 unread emails sitting in your inbox, that's creating mental clutter, even if you tell yourself you're ignoring them. Even if you tell yourself you're not ignoring them and you don't actually click on the tab, the back of your mind, they're in there. They're in there. Our inbox is not a filing system. It is not a storage system. It is not a task management system. It is not a calendar. It is a processing station. Think of it like a post office, right? Things come in and they come out, but they don't stay there. They just transfer through it. Things come in, you deal with them, and then they either get archived, deleted, turned into tasks that go somewhere else, maybe time-based things that go on your calendar, right? Again, I'm not going to go into all of the strategies for managing email right now, but I do want you to think about whether your current email habits are helping you or hurting you. All right, so we've talked about why digital clutter matters, and we've walked through the 5 main zones where it tends to accumulate. So now let's talk about what to do about it. And here's why I want to be really clear. I am not going to give you a step-by-step tutorial on exactly how to organize every single file and folder. That is not what this episode is about. That's not what I promised from the title. What I want to do is give you a framework for thinking about this so that you can figure out what's going to work best for you. That's your job, all right? Because what works for me might not work for you. What works for someone with ADHD might not work for someone who doesn't have ADHD. What works for a college student might not work for a working professional juggling multiple projects. The key is to evaluate what you're currently doing and honestly assess whether it's working or not, and then make adjustments based on what you discover. But you have to do that. You have to really do that. The next time you can't find what you need, you swore something was somewhere, but it wasn't. You're clicking through a bazillion tabs to get what you're looking for. I want you to pause. I want you to assess, to take note of what you're getting snagged on. If you don't notice, you can't make changes. So here are 3 questions I want you to ask yourself about each digital clutter zone. Okay, like I suggested, just pick one zone to start with and then run through these 3 questions for that zone. And then when you're good and ready, I want you to move on to another zone if there's another zone that needs attention, and then go through those zones again. Okay, question 1, do I need it? This is always the first question. Before you organize anything, you need to declutter, because there is no point in organizing things you don't need. So when you're looking at your files and your apps and your browser tabs, ask yourself, do I actually need this? When was the last time I used this? Is this serving a current purpose? Or is this just taking up space? If you haven't touched a file in over a year, you probably don't need it. If you have 3 copies of the same document, you only need 1. If you have apps on your phone that you downloaded for a one-time thing like 6 months ago, delete it. The goal is to get rid of the clutter before you try to organize what's left, because organizing trash is still just organized trash. There's no other name for it. Question 2, is the name clear? This one's especially important for files, right? How many untitled documents do you have floating around in your Google Drive or your computer? And obviously when I say Google Drive, I also mean like OneDrive or whatever you're using to store your digital stuff, right? I'm just kind of like in the Google ecosystem, but if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, just, OneDrive applies to you. But I have worked with students who have dozens, sometimes hundreds. I know it's a big range from dozens to hundreds, but honestly, a file's named untitled document, or weird default names like, download _ 3847292.pdf, right? And then when they need to find something, they have to open each of those files one by one to figure out what it is, kind of like me with my computer story. That's friction. That's wasted time and energy, and you're too important for that nonsense. So if you're going to keep a file, give it a clear name, something that tells you exactly what it is at a glance. And if you want to take a step further, use a consistent naming system. This is called a naming convention. Maybe it is the class name plus the assignment name. Maybe it's the project name plus the date. Whatever makes sense for you, just be consistent every time. Now, I teach a whole system for this inside School Habits University. That's my online course for high school, college, and grad students. There is an entire module on organization, both digital and physical. And we go deep into strategies for naming files, organizing folders, creating systems that grow with you as you move from school to career. I'll leave the link in the show notes if you want to check that out. It is always at schoolhabitsuniversity.com. And then finally, question 3, is this in the right place? All right, so you've decided you need the file. Cool, you've given it a name that makes sense. Now, where does it go? Now, this is where having some kind of folder structure really helps. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to set up your folders. Again, that's something we cover in detail in School Habits University. But the basic idea here is that files should have homes. They shouldn't be floating around randomly on your desktop or in your downloads folder. In whatever system you create, it should be simple enough that you'll use it. If your folder structure is so complicated that it takes, 5 clicks to get to it to where you need to be, you're not going to maintain it. All right, but let me give you one concrete tip to get you started. If you're a student, here is the simplest folder structure that usually works for most people. Create one folder for the current school year, like 2025 to 2026. And then inside that folder, create one folder for each class you're taking. That's it. All right, so 2 layers, the year and then the class. So if you're taking English, biology, and econ, you'd have 3 folders inside your 2025-2026 school year folder. And when you name your files, use the class name plus whatever the assignment actually is. So instead of like essay.docs, whatever, or untitled document, you name it English separate piece essay or bio lab report photosynthesis. Clear, and it's simple, and you'll actually be able to find it later, which is the entire point. If you're a working professional, it's the same concept. Maybe you have a folder for the current year, and inside that, folders for different clients or different projects. I don't know the details of your job. You would have to figure that out, but keep it simple. 2 layers maximum. You can always add complexity later if you need it. You probably won't, so start simple. And that right there, that one tip is probably going to solve like 80% of your where did I save that file problem. All right, it's time to move on to the next part of this episode, which is where to actually start, because now we are primed and ready for some strategies, don't you think? So here's my advice. Pick one zone that's causing you the most friction or stress right now. Maybe it's your browser tabs because you can never find what you need. Maybe it is your phone because you're always getting distracted by notifications. Maybe it is your downloads folder because it's so full that your computer keeps telling you that you're running out of storage. Whatever it is, start there. Next, block off 15 to 30 minutes. And I want you to actually put this on your calendar. If you're not using a calendar, start using a calendar, right? And you go look back to my how to use a calendar episodes, right? And tackle that one zone. Don't worry about the other zones yet. Just focus on making progress in that one area. You know, I often talk about the concept of an admin block, which is a chunk of time that you set aside for handling those unceremonious life administration tasks. And this is one of those tasks that's perfect for an admin block. And then when you've gone in and handled that one space, I want you to create a maintenance habit. This is really where the magic is, because it's easier to keep a space clutter-free than it is to get it that way. So when you put in all the work to declutter these spaces, you owe it to yourself to implement a maintenance habit to maintain that level of peace. Because a core principle here is that organization is not ever a one and done deal, whether we're talking about digital or physical spaces. I mean, you can spend a whole afternoon cleaning up your digital spaces and getting everything just perfectly organized. And then a week later, if you haven't maintained it, you are right back where you started. And that's why the maintenance piece is so critical. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting, but it's what separates people who stay organized from people who have to do a massive overhaul every few months. So maybe you do a 5-minute monthly check-in on the first of the month where, you're going in, you're deleting the unused apps from your phone. Maybe it's a daily or weekly habit of closing browser tabs at the end of your work or school day. Maybe it's a monthly audit where you go through your downloads folder and clear out what you need, naming files as soon as you create them instead of leaving them as untitled. And look, I know that building habits is hard. Like, I know that. I have a whole episode called How to Build a Habit. I forget what episode it is, but I can leave it linked below. Especially when you're overwhelmed and busy, it's really hard to build a habit. But here's what I want you to remember, that the organized people in your life, you know them, they're doing these things. They're just not talking about it. They're not spending hours every week on organization. They're spending 5 minutes here and there, maintaining their systems so they don't spiral out of control. And that's what I want for you too. And I've got to tell you that once you clean up one zone and you start maintaining it with some kind of system, the other zones get easier because you start to see the benefit. You start to feel how much clearer and calmer your digital spaces are when they're organized. And that's what's going to motivate you to keep going, either to keep, tackling another zone or to implement some maintenance system on the zones that you've already handled. I told you the story earlier about my new computer and how obnoxious it was to go through all my files on the old computer. And I used the annoyance from that situation to inform how I'm handling the files on my new computer. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for this. I am making such a strong effort to go into my downloads folder once a week. All right, I don't do it every single time, like every single day, like once a week. And have I skipped a few weeks here and there? Maybe. But I am really making an effort to clear that baby out because I don't want to go through that super obnoxious process again. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds great, but I need more help with the actual how-to, I've already said this, but that's exactly what School Habits University is for. In the organization module, I walk you through step-by-step systems for digital organization, paper organization, and study space organization. And look, I know it's called School Habits University, but don't let that throw you off if you're already in your career, because the organizational systems that I teach work for anybody who manages information. So that's students, that's professionals, that's entrepreneurs, that's lifelong learners. I actually have plenty of working professionals who take the course because their skills transfer directly into career. I mean, organization is organization, whether you're managing class assignments or client projects, right? We talk about folder structure, naming conventions, email management, and maintenance routines. And there's a whole separate lesson with modifications specifically for people with ADHD. It's designed for high school students, college students, grad students, and really any adult learner who wants to get their organizational system dialed in. And the best part is once you set up these systems, they scale with you. You can check that out at schoolhabitsuniversity.com, and the link is in the show notes. Okay, let's do a quick recap of what we have covered today. We started talking about why digital clutter matters, which has very little to do with, being neat or aesthetically pleasing, and everything to do with reducing mental load and improving your productivity. Every untitled file, every cluttered desktop, every unnecessary notification is costing you time and energy and focus. And here on this show, we're all about protecting those assets like a pot of gold. And then we talked about the 5 main digital clutter zones: your desktop, your downloads folder, your browser tabs, your phone and your iPad, kind of I group those together, and then your email. And each of these areas tends to accumulate clutter over time, and each one creates a different kind of friction in your day-to-day work. Next, we talked about the 3 key questions to ask yourself when you're organizing and decluttering. Do I need it? Is the name clear? And is it in the right place? These 3 simple questions give you a framework for making decisions about what to keep, what to delete, and where they belong. And then finally, we talked about where to actually start, and that is to pick one zone, clean it up, and create a maintenance habit. And then you move on to the next one. As I said, you don't have to do this all at once. In fact, I strongly encourage you not to do that. You don't have to get it all perfectly right the first time around. In fact, nobody ever does. But if you can commit to making progress in just one area this week, you're going to notice a difference in how you work, in how you learn, and how you feel. And if you want more help with the actual implementation, the step-by-step systems and the strategies, that's exactly what we cover in the organization module inside School Habits University. So my friends, that brings us to the close of the episode. I hope you found this helpful. And if you know someone who's drowning in digital clutter, and honestly, who isn't? I invite you to share this episode with them. You can do that easily from whatever your platform you're listening on or watching on, just by finding the little share button that always looks like a little arrow. Thank you so much for your time. Keep showing up, keep doing the hard work, keep asking the hard questions, and never stop learning.